everybody, and welcome to this takeover session with myself and the wonderful Stephanie Sneyd, looking at future-focused leadership. Where do we go? Where do we go from here? So to start off with, my name's Paula Louise-Dixon. I'm a business psychologist and coach at Hazon Consulting. My passion has always been helping people to find their performance and optimizing what goes on in the workplace setting so we can get people in the best possible place to be at their best, perform at their best, and really have great well-being in the workplace. I'm really pleased to be able to work with Stephanie today. And I just want to start off by introducing her. She's a wonderful business psychologist and coach who I've been proud to collaborate with on a number of occasions. But I'll let you introduce yourself, Steph.
Thanks, Paula, and thank you so much for inviting me to do this. This is really, really exciting to do as well. I've never done anything like this before, so thank you so much for the opportunity. So yes, Paula said, my name is Steph Sneyd. I'm a business psychologist. I specialise in leadership assessment and development and organisational assessment and development. I have a particular passion area for leaders. I think they make such an incredible difference in an organisation. They have such a massive impact on so many people's lives, people that work for them, people that live with the people that work for them, the organisations they work in, and equality in leadership is a real passion area of mine as well.
Fabulous. Okay. So what we wanted to do today in our conversation is to kind of have an exploration of what's been going on within the sector. We've all seen lots of changes that have happened as a result of the pandemic. But what we wanted to do, as always, because psychologists always go on about being evidence-based practitioners, is to maybe add a bit of our insight into some of the experiences we've had and some of the things that we've noticed, and just kind of have a bit of a chat and explore about this. So the first kind of area, Steph, that I wanted to kind of explore with you today was that idea of what we're seeing in terms of leadership. What are the kind of key topics that are hanging around or that we've noticed at the minute? And I thought what a good place to start might be something around this idea of hybrid leadership. So that idea of, people are starting to work more and more in this virtual world, and people are hoping to hang on to that. And, what kind of things are cropping up for you at the moment? What have you noticed so far?
I think this is a great place to start, Paul. I think this is such a massive topic. It's been a massive topic for a long time. Of course, that importance of it and the relevance of it absolutely shot into our prominent view, didn't it, last March when we started having our first lockdown experience. And as we know, when we're working with leaders, you get a lot of people that really don't like the idea of this, people that feel maybe they're out of control as leaders when they're not with their teams and they're not seeing what they're getting up to. I think there's generally can be quite a lot of mistrust. And I think what this experience, almost being like a social experiment, has taught us is that actually people are incredibly competent, incredibly trustworthy, incredibly capable of working in these different styles to the ones that we're used to. So I think working from home has been, for the most part, a massive social success, really. What do you think?
I think largely, and I think there's some research that certainly bears this out. I was reading over something the other day about Mercer stating that actually people weren't sure about how effective individuals would be in the working environment. I think it was some massive statistic, up to 93% of individuals had actually performed at the pre-pandemic level, but actually beyond as well. And I think there's this idea that sits behind it of you've got to build that trust in the team, haven't you? You've got to be able to know that. And I think as we move, the pandemic's brought this to the fore as well, in terms of values, why we work and the companies that we work for, we're seeking a much deeper alignment. We want to kind of really feel that we're contributing. And I think the pandemic's brought this to the fore. And actually, if we're working for an organisation that has that alignment and really values us as individuals, we kind of feel that we're making a contribution to something bigger than ourselves, and naturally that trust arises from it. What I'm starting to see is that people are thinking about voting with their feet. Those businesses where people recognise this and it's great and there's that synergy, you can really tap into some of that exceptional performance that, when you're doing more with less, that's what we need people to be able to do. And I think conversely, some organisations that have maybe not been as trusting are going to see people, as the job market opens up and things sort of do get back to, dare I say, the new normal or whatever version that is, they might start to see people actually leaving and moving to try and find that alignment. So it is a challenge, but I think it can be done. And I think keeping that flexibility, I think the style of the leadership really comes into this, doesn't it? Comes into the fore. about the kind of conversations leaders are having with individual team members. Because I think what we've absolutely learned is there's not a one size fits all style, is there?
Yeah, I think it's almost, and just generally as the way that our workplaces of the future were going to go, this essentially has just been a catalyst for this change happening quicker, right? I mean, we all knew at some point this kind of thing was coming, and a lot of people have been pushing for this. A lot of people want that better life balance. A lot of people want that more flexible working style, it to fit around their home and their family and their care responsibilities and, you know, the rest of their life. I think you're absolutely right, Paul. I think it's just going in the right direction. It's about the leadership really helping to take that along and really helping to show people what it is that they're looking for now. And I think, you know, you and I have talked as well about this idea that leaders need to be more flexible in their approach. And I think this has kind of forced them. So we might be finding some leaders that are struggling with the fact that they're having to continue doing that. I would love to think that some leaders have already started to change their approach and they're starting to think, actually, this works quite well. Let's see what else we can do with that. So I think it's about thinking, right, how can we make sure we're supporting our teams in the best possible way in this new way of working?
Yeah, really good point there. And I thought it was quite interesting. I noticed on the news this morning that Apple were talking about making people come into the office and going for that hybrid of Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And I thought actually it'd be quite interesting to know about the rationale between those particular days.
Yeah.
You know, what is it? Because we know that being face to face with people, you know, everybody talks about this opportunity for water cooler moments that we're lacking. And, you know, I do think there is something in that. I've certainly heard in terms of team members that I've worked with and heard of reported that if issues do come up in terms of the group when you're in a virtual world and these are not tackled, you know, we just kind of turn the camera off and move on.
Yeah.
That can cause challenges. But equally, I think in terms of if we have these processes and ways of working, there are some really good pieces of tech, I think, that, you know, enable people to collaborate, to have those opportunities. And I know some organisations have set up things like just having that informal time, that protected time to have non-work chat. Is that the kind of thing you're noticing too?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is essential. I think it would be very easy for leaders that have got more of, I don't know how to phrase it really politely, if I'm being completely honest, more of an old-fashioned approach to management, where it's
command and control, perhaps.
Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah, people who have control. I think this idea that, you know, if a bum is on a seat, then they're working. It's just incredibly outdated now. It's incredibly you know, inaccurate. We know all the stats around presenteeism, etc., and things like that. So I think really creating that, and I know we're going to talk about engagement, but I suppose what I want to talk about in this sense is engagement in terms of the reason people are there. Now, people aren't there to literally work for 8 solid hours of work and that's it. People need connection. People need a lot more than that. And organizations need their people to connect. So I think you're absolutely right. Having those water cooler moments and that opportunity for conversation and that encouraging those social connections between your team members and team members between teams and the organization is absolutely essential. And to ignore that, I really think it would be a big blind spot if leaders were to not think that that was important in a sort of command and control style, because we know that those connections are really important for engagement. We know they're really important for creating those social bonds in the organization. We know they're essential for networking, which is something that a lot of businesses don't tend to think about, and a lot of employees don't tend to think about. But we also know that when people want to get things done, that the best way to go about it is to draw on a bank of allies and find people from lots of different areas and different opinions to help you to create something that's great for the organization and to start to push that through in more of a impactful way. So if you don't have any connections and you don't speak to anyone ever, because all you're doing is sat typing, then it is going to be a short-sighted, let's call it that. Let's call it a myopic approach.
A little bit myopic, absolutely. That was the word that was coming to mind. Yeah. And I think, you know, this idea of how do you create the conditions for innovation, and actually that comes, doesn't it, from that connection, from having those bonds with people where you can explore ideas and comfortably share and sort of go there, because we know that psychological safety is there to enable people to feel comfortable. And I think there's another bit of research that I noticed as well from HBR. They were talking about Nordic leaders. Okay. And their kind of reflection from the top down was that actually some of, you know, this hybrid working style had really benefited, say, the CEO or the senior execs, because actually they were the individuals who were very adept at communicating in a social world, you know, presenting as a real strength of theirs. But actually, the question that sort of begs is what's going on at that lower level?
Yeah.
Because what do you think about that kind of tension for other leaders that maybe are finding themselves sandwiched a little bit between the task and the team?
I think that is such an important point. And I do think it's fantastic that they're at the more senior levels or C-suite levels, they're having these experiences and things are working well. And I think that it can work well throughout. I think that it can work well for most people or for most leaders. But I think you're absolutely right. This is a key bit that's missing. And in the article I know we're going to release this afternoon, we're talking about the fact that often leadership development interventions are brought in by senior leaders, but they're brought in just at the middle manager level. And you're like, okay, so we need to think about how more senior leaders can lead by example, lead from the top, show people the way. But also I think to be checking in with their middle managers or their other team managers to see how they're getting on, see how they're faring, see what support they need. I think it's this idea that I'm okay, so everyone else is probably okay. And I love the positivity. I'm glad they're okay. I think that's fantastic. But I think it's for them now to think, right, how can I bridge that gap between me being okay and not knowing, or knowing that someone else isn't? How can I help and support them? So I think it's for them to definitely to role model the sorts of, the positive results they're having, to also be role modeling how they're making it work well, show people the way, and if they need that support, to help them with that. But also I think it's about making sure they've got those strong communication links set up between them so that they know what's going on. And again, I think then it would be about thinking about the next levels down. So once you're speaking with your middle managers and you're helping them and supporting them, and they're getting this sort of approach much more embedded and they're feeling more comfortable and it's going well for them, how are they ensuring that the people underneath them are also getting the same benefits?
Yeah, and I think from our point of view as kind of that external partner that very much provides that support, I think as part of the packages and, the expectation I've got going forwards, there may be some input, from people like us in terms of how you help people develop that skill set and actually help individual leaders have the time away in that middle level about consciously balancing some of that and making it work. And I think the other bit that relates to that is, we talked about the confidence of those social senior people when they're engaging with other people. And I think it also invites the question, what happens to those kind of quieter leaders? I did a piece of coaching recently with a senior female leader, and we had some really interesting discussions around when people do present and, you're all faces online. If you are perhaps somebody that's maybe a little bit more introverted in style, or perhaps a reflective thinker, how do you communicate effectively when you're trying to get your point across in that kind of environment? And I think what was really interesting for that individual as we worked through that was about being able to tap into, there isn't one definitive style of communication that works. And actually, some of the friction for that individual is thinking, do I need to assert myself in a way that maybe doesn't feel natural? What arose for that person was that actually by stepping back really and recognizing that they needed that space for reflection, but when they contributed, boy, was it a point, and boy, did
amazing.
Stand up and listen, because actually what she was doing was drawing on her kind of evidence-based perspective, which of course we love. But I think there's that needs to be included in these conversations, doesn't it? So that there is that inclusivity at the level rather than just from one level down to another.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's no surprise that, people who are maybe a bit more quiet, let's say maybe a bit more introverted, I think we know we live in an extrovert's world. That has been the case for so long. And we know that things are set up and tailored much more towards the extroverted personality and the extroverted person. So I think, potentially, I think it's been great for people who are maybe more introverted, who would prefer that quiet time, who don't want to have the open office all the way around them, their colleagues chattering on all the time. So I think it's about saying, right, okay, so what can we take from this that's worked really well? What's worked really well for those different individuals? And I think I'll probably be saying that to all different types of people, to all of my leaders, what has worked well for you from this approach? What worked better about being in the office? What could be a good hybrid? What might work well, next week or in the future? What could we do to set that up? So you're absolutely right. We're all used to seeing this sea of faces, which actually we know, again, from a psychological point of view, is incredibly overstimulating for our brain.
Absolutely. I frequently have to turn my own face off. I know you're not a fan of that, but sometimes it's just too much, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not used to this much eye contact. We're not used to this much focus. When we're sitting around a meeting room, if I imagine a meeting room, we're all probably looking at the presenter, and maybe we're talking a little bit, maybe we're writing a little bit. What we're not all doing is sat with our face front and center in front of someone's eye line. So it's about understanding these limitations and understanding that might be okay for some people, but for other people that might be, just really overstimulating. So then it's about thinking, right, is this the best method for us? Are there other methods? I know if people have got, for example, Teams, you can have team chats and things like that. You can do team check-ins, ask different people what works for them. And then maybe it's about bringing all of your team together and trying some different things. Absolutely. I think let's try something with face-to-face. Let's try something when we turn the videos off. Let's try something where we try brainstorming with a different program. Let's try these different approaches and let's see what works. I think it's about, now we're starting to be allowed out more, certainly in the UK. It's about trying to understand that people do need that social contact as well. So it's about thinking, again, how can we blend that into our sort of hybrid approach, so that maybe so you mentioned Apple, they decided they're doing 3, selected days. As you say, I don't know what the logic for those days are. Is that going to work well, or actually would it work better if people could just drop in when it fitted them? So let's say, for example, they're taking the kids to something in particular on a Wednesday, so actually it's better for them to be in the office on a different day. And then you might get the more beneficial elements of the fact that it's a blended, flexible approach. Because again, if it's 3 solid days and those other days, it's getting less flexible. Again, it might be that it's still different, but the idea of the flexible was that people could work when it was right for them. So, and I think it was going off on a little bit of a tangent now, Paula, but I think
please do
try and stop me. I think also that tolerance that we've had for people's real life being around when we're seeing them at work. And I think that's actually incredibly important. And actually, can I just tell you about something which I saw literally yesterday, which was a lady I can't remember whereabouts in the USA, but essentially she'd applied for a job. She'd been offered an interview as I think it's a marketing management position. And she'd said, I'm so sorry, I don't have childcare that day. And they said, we're a child-friendly employer. So her 1-year-old got his little suit on and went to the interview with her, and was, this head of this company, or this owner of this company, was incredibly inclusive about the fact that her son could be there in the interview, rather than saying, you're a great candidate, but you have a child, so no, we won't see you when it suits. We'll only see you when it suits us. If that doesn't suit you, then you're not appropriate, which of course we know is not right. You're not getting the best people then, are we?
Yeah,
not truly inclusive. I mean, she did point out that, yes, it's distracting having your toddler in an interview.
The child in the actual interview room.
Yeah, it was in the actual interview. Wow. So it might be that some people are thinking, well, I definitely don't want that. Fine. It's about saying, right, what is a good, flexible, hybrid approach? Where can we flex more so that people's lives aren't trying to fight with their work? So again, it's all about thinking what is going to make our people happiest, healthiest, want to be here, care about our customers, care about our mission. And the more we can support people with being real humans, I think the better.
Yeah. And I think with that blurring of boundaries, I mean, that's a lovely example, but I've lost track of the number of cats that have appeared and children. And actually, to begin with, it was a bit like, this is strange, but I think there's a certain humanity, and that's the word that kind of springs to mind for me about the humanity of how we all engage with one another. And I think there's also underlying issues, isn't there, about this level of inclusivity in terms of those individuals with childcare, perhaps further caring responsibilities, because what we know is that if we exclude, there may be gendered impacts of who's doing that. And I think from a bringing it back to that leadership point of view again, there is an impact, I think, there that if it is the mum with childcare, or perhaps somebody with older relatives that are needing that support, and those individuals can't make that flexibility work, then that individual is effectively, closed out of the community. And what do we do about that?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? This is if we really want to get the best talent and get the best people to work for our organisations, which I'm pretty sure we do.
Well, I've not met anyone that said anything to please recruit me the worst person you can find, because they're there between Monday and Wednesday in the office.
Yeah. It needs to be, how can we get the best people, not how can we get the most available people.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's a hashtag in there somewhere. I don't know what it could be.
Not available.
Oh well, yeah. And I think moving back to some of the other topics in relation to this, I think there's this idea of the style of leadership that works well. If we can now move to that, I think if we think about the pandemic being an example of this VUCA world that we live in, we talk very much about the digitalization and the different demographic requirements, and through all of that, the pandemic's a perfect example. But let's be honest, these kind of challenges, if you will, actually do come about once every 10 years. So although this has been possibly the greatest, most impactful and far-reaching that the world has seen in this regard, it's probably not going to be the last one. And I think there are potential lessons to be learned there about the types of leaders. I know certainly from the individuals that I've seen, that I've worked with over the pandemic, and also from research and things that I've read, we know that the ideal type of leader who can help navigate is someone that's able to show empathy and concern, is somebody that takes that tailored approach. But I think that in line with that, there's also that expectation, isn't there, these days, that employees want the companies, the leadership, to have an opinion on some of these things and kind of comment. What do you think about that? What have you noticed in that space?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's this idea, isn't it, that we're focusing much more on a values-based approach now. And I think that this idea of, company values have been around for a long time, but I think they mean more to people now. And certainly when we look at the research with the up and coming generations, our younger generations that come into the workplace, we know they will work for less to work for a company that more closely aligns with their values, to work for a company that is more, for example, globally and climate change ready, to work with a company that is more inclusive for different elements of equality and diversity. We know that, people, millennials, that if you want to put that badge on this for now, will want to take those positions that matter to them. They want to work for causes that matter to them. They want to work for organizations that are ethically and morally in line with their values. And I think that, again, organizations would be really missing a trick. Let's go back to myopic if they didn't think that this was here to stay. I think this, again, we've moved away from that command and control a long time ago. I mean, there's still essences of it everywhere, as we know. But, we've moved into this approach where leadership is a lot more related to things like emotional intelligence. We've had all of that big push for emotional intelligence, and I think it's sunk in a lot of big and good places in a good way. We can always do more with it, of course we can, but I think this is the next level. I think this is thinking, right, so how can we take this emotionally intelligent approach not just to our leadership style, but to what we stand for as an organization? People don't want the tax dodging organizations anymore. People don't want to invest in these morally and ethically slightly questionable companies anymore.
Yeah, and I think with the advent of social media as well, we're a lot more brand savvy, aren't we? We kind of choose not only sort of companies to work for, but also brands and services that we select that we feel that natural alignment. And I think
we're much more aware, aren't we?
Yeah.
Sorry, we're much more aware. Yeah.
I was just going to say, what I'm like, as after being described as the most values-driven person, that's what I'm all about. But I think the other side of this as well that is often not discussed enough is that some of this kind of empathic approach is often still positioned as a soft skill.
Soft skill.
And for me, I'm glad the roll of the eyes came about it, because for me, there's nothing soft in the people side of it. And the way I heard this kind of idea of empathic leadership described as a meta skill. It's a skill that informs other skills, because it's, I don't know, when we talk about it as soft, it's something that we're just going to have a little stroke of somebody and then
little dabble in it before.
It's often put as a HR thing, isn't it, or a concern for someone to pop in and do something and stroke people, and then we move on. So that's quite a challenge. We've got a question.
This is exciting.
It's very exciting. How can learning that comes from the COVID era help leaders support better employees with mental challenges or chronic illness? Oh, that's a good one.
First of all, hi, good to see you.
Yes, thanks for the question.
Should we jump straight into that now? So how can
let's do it. I think that's a good
leaders better support employees? Yeah. So let's talk about well-being, shall we? Should we jump into well-being? I think I'll tell you what, I think this is a really hot topic. Paula, do you think this is a hot topic that's here to stay? Is this a flash in the pan? Is this something that matters to people? What are your thoughts?
If we talk about well-being from the mindset of, I will pay for some mental health first aid training because I think it's going to help me wring that extra little bit out of my employee, then no, I think that is not the way of looking at it. But I think if we're looking at I know it's, sometimes we use this word a lot and people go, oh, I don't like that word. But if we think about what it means, if we're talking about, the person, how they're functioning, what they're bringing to the role, are their needs being met? We know without a doubt, don't we, that individual, if they're feeling in that state where they are psychologically safe, is going to be the one that is committed, is likely in psychological speak to show, those organizational citizenship behaviors. They're going to go above and beyond. They're going to be connected. And I think going back to that idea of how do you do more with less, for me in the short term, if you're wringing people out, you're not going to get a lot from them, or, you're going to cause them to burn out. And actually, I think people are becoming increasingly better at seeing through, insincere approaches that don't work. Yeah. So for me, this idea of well-being needs to be reflected through all levels of a business strategy. It's not an objective for its sake. It's a mechanism by which we recognise the value of an individual and what they can bring to the work environment.
Yeah,
that's a long-winded explanation for that.
No, that's okay. I think as well, I've just noticed that there's a whole comment section. So I'm just gonna, is it okay if we just pick up on some of these comments? So, hi Lauren. Hi Michael. Michael's talking about trust being such a key element for organization. There we go. For organizations to have with their employees. Absolutely, completely agree. Hi David. Yeah, do you think we've answered that? So let's just recap what Joe's asked us. So how can learning that comes from a COVID era help leaders better support employees with mental well-being challenges or chronic illness, for example? So what do we think about what we've learned from this, let's call it social experiment that was COVID?
Well, I've got one for you straight off the bat. I think that's quite a nice way that I heard described this idea of transition truths. Ooh. That we know when, I think, sometimes when people are going through something and it previously it might have been maybe a bereavement or a significant life event, we kind of feel sorry for them and we'd support them and they go through it. But I think because we've had this kind of experience en masse, it's that idea of, we've gone through change, and we've all gone through a degree of change. Mm-hmm. But the idea of this transition truths is that deeper understanding of, we could be team members having gone through the same thing, but actually how you react and how I react could be entirely different. Yeah. And that idea behind the transition truths is that understanding of, first of all, that these reactions that we're having and experiencing are normal. It's going to happen. And also that, these things take time to adjust. The road's going to be bumpy. And actually it will affect different people at different times and in different ways. And there's something around that kind of maybe having, so much data about this experience and how people are manifesting it can actually help us to understand a little bit more, maybe at the personal level, why one employee, speaking about it from a leadership point of view, maybe why one employee might be reacting differently to another, why one might sail through something, why another might be closer to burnout. Yeah. And I think that idea of tailoring the intervention, or kind of as a leader, really sincerely checking in with that person and saying, how are you? And meaning it, not just kind of being battered away as we tend to do. There's some learning behind that, isn't there, about the better the relationship between you and the team member, the more likely that individual is to maybe share what's going on. And perhaps actually that might prevent some of these kind of, as we move through that change curve and the burnout curve, we might be able to stop some people really being at this end before we actually notice what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd add to that as well. So I think the thing that's come to my mind is the transformational leadership model. And I'm not going to obviously go into talking about a model now, but I'm just thinking of one point from that, which is about individualized consideration.
Absolutely. And I think
this was something that existed anyway, something we would have been encouraging anyway, something we would have said is important anyway. But I think coming back to Joe's question, which I think is great, is how can we make that a bit more useful, a bit more relevant? So I think we might have thought that we knew our teams before, we knew everyone relatively well. Now we've gone through this really, really challenging, really difficult period of adjustment and time together. As you said, there's been so much happening through that. I think there is the potential to deepen those relationships with our employees. And I think, again, to come back to what you said, the more we do know and understand our people and actually care about them, the more we can support them with, for example, mental wellbeing challenges they may have or chronic illness challenges. I really like to hope that, exactly as you said, it's brought out the humanity in people. I definitely agree with Michael that actively encouraging cats on Zoom. And it's that thing, isn't it, about saying you're a real human and I care about you as a real human. I know you don't come into the workplace and then all of the rest of your life vanishes. You don't cease to be a mark.
Compartmentalized.
Yeah, you don't cease to wear all of those hats, do you? So it's about thinking, right, how can I understand that better? Now that we know it matters, at a bigger level than I think we ever thought before. And, one of the things I really found so wonderful and so heartening at the earlier stages of lockdown is how much everyone cared for everyone else. We saw this real explosion of empathy and compassion and support. And I'd love to see that taken as a learning point that can have a really big effect. I'd love to actually be great to see some data coming out at some point where maybe organizations or some of the the big ones look at that, how those different approaches, that much more empathic, much more inclusive, much less, can you please get your kid out of the room, can you please not have your cat there, can you
pause your life crisis,
can you pause your life. Yeah, exactly. I'd love to see how that has impacted people, how that's impacted well-being. I'd imagine in a positive way. That would be my expectation. And if that is the case, how can we carry on doing that? How can we carry on really caring about people? And for the not to be this line in the sand where we go, right, I've seen today on the news that, of course, the furlough is going to start to phase out. Of course it's got to. Of course it was never going to stay forever. I'd like to think that there won't at some point be a line in the sand where we go, right, let's go backwards again because we've moved this far forwards. To do that would be tragic, I think, to move past all of that useful stuff.
And I think the other point to say as well is that, with long COVID, we know that lots of, particularly women, it seems to be presenting in potentially for whatever reason. People are going to be supporting individuals as they return to work with some of these long COVID symptoms in terms of the fatigue, challenges with caseload perhaps or volume of work. And so actually these lessons learned about that need to be flexible. And I think there's something in that, isn't there, about, we talked earlier about the balance for team and task and making sure, how do you get that? And businesses that still kind of hammering home that task are really going to struggle with that because individuals will need to be supported. And I think those that are kind of maybe rigid in how they implement their HR policies around things like that are going to see lots of people going either, coming back briefly and leaving or moving towards burnout and having to stop, because I think as people transition both psychologically, maybe getting used to doing this hybrid or even for some back in the office or even permanently at home, there's that kind of mental transition through that as we move. And we know a lot of people carry stress, don't we? And in that moment, we keep going. And when that immediate sort of stressor situation stops, that's often when people kind of fall to pieces because, the cortisol's been going. So I think that the lessons learned need to be that freeing up in terms of applying policies. Leaders need to be in a position where they have the autonomy to kind of make those adjustments for the needs of team members. Because let's be honest, if you are somebody that positively receives that care and consideration, we know that when individuals do go back to work or, they want to do more, not less. And it's about building that kind of recognition and that goodwill that is actually really how we want to treat people in this day.
Absolutely. And I know you sort of were sort of hinting towards it then, but I know as well, I don't know where this stat came from, I apologise. I was speaking with a colleague last week who said that around 20% of the workforce have the intention to move to a different job.
I've seen higher statistics than that.
Really? Yeah.
Up to 40%, yeah.
There you go. So people are going to use the feet, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, another exciting question. Michael, yeah.
I feel like we're on a panel show.
I know. Paula, let's hear from our next question.
Okay, this is a great question from Mike. How big is the challenge for leaders who come from previous generations, I like this, to support young people who are, generally speaking, much more value-driven and socially conscious than previous generations. So I guess what he's asking, just to kind of dig into that a little bit, is, for me, I'm hearing flexing. It's that flexing of leadership style. You know, as Generation X people, I guess from our point of view, we didn't grow up with digital in the same way. So that's a change for us. Perhaps we're a little bit, I'm just trying to think of what it usually describes as Generation X by, a bit more financially driven than some. So for me, if we're thinking about what sits underneath it, it's that need for tailoring, isn't it? Because we can, you know, if we imagine that a leader gets to know their team members, we can often ascertain their individual motivators, what's important to them, by conversations that we have, things that we do in the workplace. So I think for me, that the emotional intelligence part of this is key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you're an emotionally intelligent leader, I guess, regardless of the demographic that you fall into, you're in a position to kind of know yourself, understand someone else, and kind of do that adaptation piece that helps. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's coming back to, actually, I've been talking about Stephen Covey quite a lot recently, but actually I was looking at one of his seven elements yesterday from his most famous book, which I can never remember the name of.
Signs of Highly Effective People.
There you go.
Yep, I was on about that one yesterday as well.
One of his 7 things was seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think for me that very much fits in with what I think those leaders need to do. That maybe, and you said previous generations, which I think is, you know, great that you're being open about that, Mike. I think also if it's not a generational thing, it might just be that you're very different. You know, we're looking at more and more diversity and more equality, which is incredibly important. So we're getting, you know, lots more different people around us that we're maybe not used to. Societally, we're not used to having around us all the time. I think it's about saying, right, I know that I don't understand, but I would like to understand. So, you know, please can you talk to me about why that's important to you? I want to really understand why it's important to you, and I'd love to understand how you'd like me to best help you and support you, and you know, how you'd like to be, which I think again comes back down to that individualized consideration. We'd like to take in that approach anyway, but I think the challenge, I think, can be really big, Mike, to answer your question. I think it will depend on the individual, very much an individual thing. Some people are naturally, exactly as you said, Paula, extremely adept at flexing their emotional intelligence. Some people are much less so. So I think it's about listening to people, but listening to understand, not to go, well, that's what I think about it. Well, that was my experience with it. Well, that's what I saw about it. Well, that's what my friend Jeremy or met in the pub said to me. You know, I think we need to be really listening to people and listening to really care about what they're saying to us, and understanding that, you know, if people do want that more value-driven and socially conscious world, you know, how your organisation is going to step up to the mark for that. And we had a little comment through, which is great from Jo. She's absolutely right. So habits. It's thinking about how are we building these habits into our day-to-day life? How are we taking these things? Here she comes. How are we taking these things? Yeah, that might feel like they're new and novel and making them our new reality. And the answer is to make them become our habits, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think there's the other bit that, and I know this is a point that Steph always enjoys sharing, I think, but it's that idea, isn't it, about we don't expect leaders to have all of the answers. I know that leaders often feel that way, particularly new leaders. They feel like they're the one that they must know everything about everything. But I think there's something about being open to the learning part, you know, showing that empathy, being willing to, you know, acknowledge that we know that when people are stressed out, we do become more myopic and our ability to put ourselves into someone else's shoes declines. And we can't, you know, it's harder to think our way out of it. But actually by, you know, if we kind of accept, okay, we don't have all the answers and I'm not expected to, I think what that can do for individual leaders is shift them into that space of, okay, I don't know everything, but I'm willing to kind of partner with you and explore what that looks like. Yeah. And again, it's that tailoring, isn't it?
Definitely. I've just realised that actually Jo was saying it's the 7 habits of highly effective people. We got their events.
Signs, yes.
Yeah, 7 signs, 7 things of 7 habits. So coming back to that point, and I think this is something I say to leaders when I work with them all the time. It's important as a leader to become more comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Oh, we love that.
I love it. I just think it's so true. And the people that have worked with that have embraced that, have come back to say to me, I'm really getting better at that. It's really making a massive difference for me. Because, and I think that links in with Mike's question as well. You know, if let's say we're uncomfortable because people are very different from us potentially, or because we don't understand them in the way we did used to understand all of our colleagues, or we thought we did. You know, I think it's about saying, you know, let's go with a bit of a Sheryl Sandberg on this. Let's lean in. Let's lean into that. Let's say this feels uncomfortable, but that's okay. It's okay that I don't know. It's okay that I don't understand, and show that humility. And, you know, it's so important, isn't it, to show people and role model to people the behaviors that you want to see. So it's about saying, I don't understand this, but that's okay. Let's not have a meltdown about it, or, you know, worse, pretend it doesn't exist and just ignore the person. And let's not, you know, let's get the E and the D and forget the I. Let's not include people. Let's say that doesn't feel great for me to not know this because I'm used to understanding, but I don't. And that's okay. So now it's about how can I show people that it's okay to, you know, to lean into that discomfort and say, okay, it's all right not to know everything. How can I find out? How can I help people? It's about that being really open and having that humility, I think, as a leader, to show people that it's okay to not know everything.
And I think that very act of giving people permission, giving yourself permission as a leader can be very free, but giving others permission, and as you say, role modeling that culture. Because what we know, I think, is when people are under stress, actually that's when decision making can go out of the window. People are making emotionally driven, and actually if we're saying we know this is uncomfortable but it's all right, we'll hold it lightly, we create that situation where we're not going to be more emotionally driven in that kind of thinking. Another question, let's have a look.
Absolutely. So, right, another one
this afternoon.
You're doing a fantastic job. Thank you, Jo. So how can leaders balance the drive and pressure for achievement and hitting targets, for example, with the inevitable shift in focus towards supporting flexibility, individual needs and well-being?
Shall I start with this one? Because this is
sure.
A lot of leaders that I've been working with.
Okay.
I think there's a time element to this, because we know that the job needs to be done. But I think if we kind of step back and think about it holistically, if we are driving people who are, shall we say, struggling, not well, and we keep driving them, we ignore perhaps what's going on at home, we ignore their psychological well-being, and we keep driving them tasks. You know, we want that output, we want the output. I think that there's a finite amount of time that is sustainable. And I think we've already talked about people voting with their feet, you know, people feeling wrung out. We're only doing this well-being thing because we think we'll get more from you. And I think there's an element of that. It's not sustainable. And I think for the people that are doing it, feeling that you are being treated in that way and you are not being considered, I think can often make people do less, not more, because people become, you know, at the very best, unmotivated, unproductive, perhaps, you know, start to search for another position. And I think there needs to be an acknowledgement of, when we're transitioning, that if we're acknowledging what's going on for you as a result of that, we're going to have to make some adjustments here. We're not saying abandon any targets, because obviously businesses are businesses, but there is a lot of research that sort of sits behind that idea of those cultures where individuals, where people are at the heart of it. There was something that I read in terms of Glassdoor, you know, the top 20 rated companies that have that kind of people-focused culture now have valuations of over $1 billion, and that's consistently so. So it's not, going back to this idea, it's not just the soft, let's cuddle everybody. There's something in that about these people, and our employees need looking after and supporting on that journey, because otherwise we're going to lose them, or the performance will stop. You know, that's my thoughts on it. But with the idea that hopefully when these individuals have progressed, maybe if there's a strong culture about speaking up and getting that support and intervening earlier, then individuals don't go off, don't leave, and actually maybe recover quickly, feel respected, feel motivated, and are more inclined to be driven towards innovation, creativity and performance.
Absolutely. And I think it will be interesting to see probably over the next couple of years that we'll see it, and we might not see the full picture until it's been a couple of years, that we'll see who were those organizations that lost a lot of people because they weren't walking the talk anymore, or they, you know, people didn't have this mismatch with their values.
Well, I have actually, just to interrupt you there, I have an actual example from a personal friend of mine that works with the particular organization did not need to bring in his level of employee There wasn't a need to physically be in the office, but insisted on doing that anyway because they wanted to see what was going on. And when I asked my friend, what did you think was going on there? It was that they don't trust us.
Yeah.
And actually what they've already seen is several people, there's a very transient employee,
being treated like a commodity, not like that needs monitoring rather than like a human being. Yeah. And I think coming back to sort of Joe's question, I think for me, I would love to think, maybe I'm being a bit idealistic, that they're not mutually exclusive. So I'd love to think that a lot of big companies and a lot of great companies would have a target and a strategy and a mission around having a fantastic, supportive, individual needs-based, well-being focused business. I'd love to think that that was on that top table for a lot of good organizations. I'd love to think that that's something they're also aimed. So they're probably going to have, for argument's sake, let's say, a fiscal or a financial types of figures. I'd love to think that alongside those different figures and alongside those different targets and strategies that they're aiming towards, that they've also got something that says we want to do this with our employees because we really care about them. And I think you're absolutely right. People are going to vote with their feet if they don't feel cared about. So I think that balance between that driving pressure for achievement and hitting targets, it does make, businesses are businesses. I do agree with that. But it does make me think, should we really be focusing business in exactly the same way as we were 18 months ago? Or should businesses be thinking, let's lower our targets slightly in certain areas so that we can make sure we do it well, we do it properly, we're not damaging anyone, we're not going for profit over, the health and well-being of the people that work here. I'd love to think that would be happening somewhere.
But if people leave, and then you've got recruitment costs.
Yep, it's going to cost them.
If they're absent, if there's litigation because things have been handled badly. Actually, if we're talking, just in the metrics, the financials, those organisations that have behaved in that way are going to suffer from those kind of things anyway. So I think, really good point there. And I think the other bit to say is as well, we've talked a lot about how leaders are securing that culture on behalf of other people. For me, there's a really big piece about that self-compassion in there, having worked with a whole different range of leaders, in sort of coaching and leadership development over lockdown. I think there's a massive desire to do well, to balance, to care about individuals. So I think that actually starting with the self-compassion piece, it's about, everybody's seen this idea of putting your oxygen mask on because, the air, what was it, somebody saying one of the sessions, the air's really thin at the top.
Yeah.
Thinner as you go up, and actually you need to keep it on. But I think there is something in that, isn't there, about that individual being in their best possible space, because we know that, if you're managing lots of challenges across your teams, we don't want those leaders slipping into empathic distress themselves.
Absolutely.
It's not leaders got to look after everybody else and not themselves. It's that kind of tension, isn't it, and that balance.
Yeah, there's actually something I'd love us to have a quick chat about before we move on from this, which is, let's say for argument's sake, you're listening to this, you're a leader, you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, that sounds so fluffy. They've got no idea what it's like working in this really busy, businessy business world. Can we just have a quick chat about what are going to be the impacts if organisations don't take this kind of stuff seriously? You've already mentioned recruitment costs, so that's going to cost you a fortune. Re-recruiting that 40% of your people, potentially not with people who are going to be as skilled and experienced. You're going to lose all that experience out of the business from your former employees. So you're having that massive loss and that massive expense. What else do we think is going to be?
For me, the big one. Your loss of reputation in the marketplace. If we're talking about people seeking out those businesses that they go, I can see myself, it's more than just the 9 to 5, I want to be part of that, then actually there's going to be massive reputational damage, isn't there? If organisations are known as the one that, just keeps going through people and there's no real kind of well-being or care or strategy behind it, I think that will be significant, particularly in terms of candidate selection. I hate to refer to people as talent in kind of as a commodity, but it is in terms of selecting the best people for the job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, of course, we know that in terms of engagement, we know that has such an incredibly big impact on organisations and on productivity. And, we've talked about things like presenteeism. We've not really talked particularly about absenteeism, illness, things like that.
Yep.
You know, we've got different, we've talked a little bit about equality. Of course, we know from coronavirus that our BAME colleagues have been disproportionately affected. So we know that, again, we're getting this potential impact on things like our diversity and equality. And I think it's this thing, isn't it, where to imagine that this is soft and fluffy and doesn't have real life impact will be incredibly, again, I've said it a lot of times though, be incredibly naive to think that this stuff is not going to impact your bottom line and not going to impact. And again, you know, we talked about people voting with their feet from an employment point of view. Let's think about the customers. Let's think about suppliers. You know, are they going to work with organisations that aren't looking after their teams and their people? So, you know, Joe just sent us a great point, which is, you know, people that leave an employer because of lack of trust, support, or inflexibility are going to look for employers who do have those things. So this is it. So again, you're missing you're missing a trick. You're totally missing a trick if you're not going to do this and you're thinking that sounds super fluffy and not like something I want to. This is going to cost you a fortune, and this is going to mean a massive overhaul of your business, and not necessarily in the way you would like it to happen.
Yeah, and I have to say, as someone who's kind of run values-based recruitment drives, I think there is something in terms of, you know, moving beyond just the competency. We need to know the person can do the job. But actually, when you start to tap into those values and you get, you know, often people, when they talk about it, hand on heart, or it's something really emotive. And I think being able to kind of connect with people and make the workplace meaningful, that idea of making the workplace a well place, it's not a nice to have anymore. I think it's fundamental in my world anyway, and certainly with the clients that I've been working with and hope to work with going forwards. And it's just about, you know, we talked a little bit about the equality and diversity side of things. And I think by having the opportunity to look at how we engage people and, you know, and tailor our approach is so crucial to that, even in terms of sort of, you know, recruiting individual people who are from different cultures and the language that we use and how we present ourselves more visually. Those kind of things are so crucial, I think, now in terms of creating that space and allowing people's voices to be heard, because actually we, you know, what kind of world of work do we want to be in? What do we want it to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You're hosting. I can't help myself. So I'd love to chat a bit more about well-being. So I know that we've had a lot of reactive well-being interventions coming into play, haven't we? How can organisations be more proactive about well-being?
I think we've got us very well. We need to move beyond this idea of tick box exercise. We've gone out and we've kind of bought in, you know, some mental health first aid training, and therefore we're done. And I think that's the problem. We understand that the intention for a lot of organisations is to do well, you know, to care about people. The intention is there. But I think when we're talking about well-being and moving from that reactive, what drives someone to reach out in the first place is often, you know, the metrics aren't going in the way that we want. We've got lots of people off. So the first bit is acknowledging maybe what's going on there. And certainly in terms of, you know, the way that we would work, like, let's be honest, as psychologists, I think part of our strength is that holistic view, isn't it? What you're told is the issue. You get in there and you kind of pull the thread. And actually what comes out is something over here. And I think part of understanding that in terms of well-being and moving people along is looking at, are you walking the talk? You know, if you've got these values on the wall that say we're inclusive, we care about people, and actually the reality is that people are being bullied, they're being, you know, pressurized to hit targets, then actually that lack of congruence, that lack of marrying up of the two can really massively impact, because we know that the behaviours are the way that we do things around here. If we've got leaders that aren't, you know, the kind of saying, well, you choose how you want to work, but let's be honest, you need all of this done, and you know that they're working until midnight. How does that work? So I think that this idea of we need to move beyond platitudes. It needs to be real observable action. And I think the first step is that kind of proactivity, is looking at what can be done. So we, you know, looking at all levels here. Are leaders open to making these changes? Do they see the value? And I think sometimes from our point of view, going back to the soft and fluffy again, it's about creating that business case and actually showing some of the metrics where, you know, people are well, people are happy. Actually, there are performance indicators that back up why that is a desirable state to be in. So there's pieces at that level. There's the idea of having a strategy that's aligned to the business strategy. and actually having specific objectives. It's about allowing people a voice. It's about inviting those conversations, and it's about, you know, having those conversations, not necessarily top down. We know role modeling is important, but actually for a lot of people, their role models might be somebody that's a peer or in a different department. So it's about really kind of getting those early adopters, if you're really serious, at all levels of an organisation. And really, you know, talking about some of the good things that are going on. I know that lots of people have had sort of, you know, groups, connections, you know, yoga. There are all these wonderful things that people do. So it's about signposting that.
Yeah.
I think it's about letting people know what's available in terms of maybe an employee assistance plan if they're struggling. And it's about kind of creatively pulling all of that together so that people know what's available to them. But for me, there's a lot in how you feel you're treated when you're at work.
Yeah.
And then obviously with the help of maybe some specific training on things like emotional intelligence, on resilience. And it's kind of how you know, develop people and enhance their skill sets. Because we know that, you know, emotional intelligence can be enhanced. We know that resilience can be developed. So it's about helping and equipping people. I've been delivering some training in the kind of positive coping. And part of that around stress management isn't about saying, you know, we're going to put you in an increasingly stressful position and just expect that you cope. We sent you off on the stress training. You should be able to cope. It's about acknowledging that actually you are, you know, you're within a system, and there will be an extent to which enough is enough. And it's about the leaders role modeling that, maybe sharing some of the frustrations and the realities and creating that conversation, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think I don't know if I've got that much more to add. I suppose I'm thinking if you move from that reactive space into proactive, I suppose then you're thinking actually you're being quite preventative, right?
Absolutely. That's the kind of final aspect of it, I think, that, you know, you recognise that you're putting things in place and you're in that preventative mode, that actually that comes from it because actually you've reached that critical mass of people. You've got people who are engaged. There's the mechanisms to support them if they need it. They feel valued. They feel like they've got a contribution to make. You know, they've got maybe degrees of autonomy in the roles that they do, because we know all of that is wonderful. They're able to make decisions. They're included in things, you know, all this kind of thing about changes. You consulted. And I think there's a lot of that where psychology can really add to helping people build on what they're already doing, but consciously kind of bringing that together to create that culture. And it's certainly the place that I enjoy working.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, I mean, it's clear to me from what you're saying that this is not an overnight thing. And I think that's one of the things that businesses maybe aren't as comfortable with, because like you're saying, they love this idea of doing something transactional, like bringing someone in to do a talk, or we take on some resilience training, there you go, you're sorted. Like, you know, we've ticked a box. And even if they
bit London then. South London.
Sorted. And even if they've not got that intention of doing it for that reason, it can be difficult to implement those behaviours as a culture, can't it? So it's about the leaders role modelling those behaviours, isn't it? Showing people how
it's an ongoing commitment, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, it's not a short-term fix at all.
Yeah, because the thing is, as we know with COVID, the wellbeing piece is a moving landscape, isn't it? We know that people are going to react differently. So it's about, I think, for organisations going, what kind of employee do we want to be? What's important to us? And if that's the case, we know that, you know, we need to adjust our kind of HR and our development metrics accordingly, because actually by doing that, that's how we get the engagement up and the kind of committed workforce, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just conscious of the time. So are we?
Yes, I think we're about there, aren't we? Just to check if there's any more comments or questions as we wrap things up.
I knew we could happily do this for probably about 3 days worth of chatting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that was it from us. Fabulous.
Wonderful. Have we got any sort of quick takeaway points that people could take, do you think? What are some of our here's
That's
something
a really good idea.
So isn't it to think of now?
Well, I mean, the good news is that for some of the other posts that we're putting out there later on, including your blog and one of mine, some ideas for managing in the hybrid world.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it will build on those top tips in terms of things like continued communication, having those open conversations. So I think actually we'll encourage you to come and look at the post that we're going to pop out later on. How about that? Maybe I've popped out of that, but
that's such a great answer, Paula. Excellent. We'll jump into politics. We'll be starting when?
Not anytime soon. Well, just to wrap things up then, I just want to say it's been really great to speak to the Northern Affinity community, but also thank you so much for Steph for talking with me today, and I hope that everybody's found it useful. Please do reach out and connect with us. We'd love to have these conversations and continue them with you, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. But thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, Paula. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.